If you enjoy true disturbing horror stories, you would definitely be a fan of my channel. I upload true stories regularly, so if you want to be part of the journey, please like and subscribe. As always, enjoy the video. It all started with a simple swipe. I was scrolling through Hinge one quiet Friday night, looking for a quick distraction from my mundane routine. I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship, and honestly, the thought of meeting someone new was both exciting and terrifying. As I flipped through the profiles, one caught my eye. His name was Ryan, and he had that rugged, outdoorsy vibe that I always found attractive. His photos showed him hiking, camping, and even holding a fish he'd caught, which was something I'd never done. There was something about his smile that felt genuine. I swiped right, and to my surprise, we matched almost instantly. Ryan messaged me right away, and our conversation flowed easily. We talked about everything, our favorite hiking spots, music, and the quirks of life in the city. The more we chatted, the more I felt drawn to him. He had this charm that made him seem down to earth, yet there was a hint of mystery that kept me intrigued. After a few days of chatting, we decided to meet up for coffee at a local cafe. I was nervous but excited, hoping this would lead to something real. The day of our date arrived, and I dressed carefully, wanting to make a good impression. When I walked into the cafe, I spotted him right away. He was sitting at a corner table, and even from a distance, I could see that his smile was just as warm in person. We exchanged pleasantries, and I quickly realized that he was even more charming in real life. We laughed, shared stories, and the hours seemed to fly by. By the end of our first date, I felt a genuine connection, and Ryan asked if I wanted to go hiking the following weekend. I said yes without hesitation. The hike was breathtaking. We drove out to a trail that Ryan had recommended, surrounded by towering trees and the smell of fresh pine. It felt like something out of a movie. As we walked and talked, I learned more about him. He had a passion for nature, and it was clear he spent a lot of time outdoors. I admired his enthusiasm, but there were moments when I caught a glimpse of something else, a darkness maybe. It was subtle, just a flicker in his eyes when he talked about solitude and the wildness of nature. Still, I brushed it off. Everyone has their quirks, right? As the weeks went by, our dates became more frequent. I found myself getting lost in his world, joining him on hikes and camping trips. I loved how he made me feel alive, pushing me to try new things. He was fiercely protective of me, always making sure I was safe and comfortable, but there were times when his protectiveness felt a bit overbearing. He would insist on carrying my backpack or setting up the tent himself, even when I offered to help. I thought it was sweet at first, but it became clear that he had a need to control every aspect of our adventures. Things started to shift after about a month. I noticed little things that made me uneasy. He would often check his phone, and when I asked who he was texting, he would brush it off with a vague answer. One evening, while we were sitting by a campfire, I saw him staring into the flames, and for a moment, he looked lost. There was a heaviness in the air, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that every relationship has its ups and downs. One weekend, Ryan suggested we go on a more remote hike, saying it would be a great adventure. I hesitated, but he was so enthusiastic that I couldn't say no. We drove for hours until we reached a secluded area that I had never heard of before. It felt eerily quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were the only ones around for miles. The trail was narrow and overgrown, but Ryan seemed to know exactly where he was going. As we hiked deeper into the woods, I noticed that the atmosphere grew heavier. The trees closed in around us, and the sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy. I felt a growing sense of unease, and I tried to joke about it, but Ryan didn't laugh. Instead, he seemed more focused, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if he were searching for something. I brushed it off again, telling myself it was just a part of the adventure. After a couple of hours, we reached a clearing with a stunning view. I was relieved to finally take a break, but Ryan was still on edge. He kept glancing over his shoulder, And when I asked him if everything was okay, he just nodded, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. As we sat there, I realized I was feeling increasingly anxious. It was as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Suddenly, Ryan stood up and pointed to a trail that led deeper into the woods. He said we should explore it, and without thinking, I followed him. The trail was less defined, and I felt a knot forming in my stomach. As we walked, I could hear the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of something moving in the underbrush. I tried to laugh it off, but Ryan seemed unfazed. He was focused, almost as if he were searching for something specific. After what felt like an eternity, we stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin. It was the kind of place you'd see in horror movies: broken windows, overgrown vines, and an eerie silence. Ryan's eyes lit up with excitement, and before I could voice my concerns, he was already heading toward the entrance. I hesitated, feeling a surge of fear wash over me. Something felt very wrong, but I didn't want to seem scared or unsupportive. Inside the cabin, it was dark and musty. The floor creaked under our weight, and the air felt thick with dust. Ryan was rummaging through old boxes, his face lit with a strange joy that I didn't understand. I stood near the door, feeling increasingly trapped. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to walk away. I felt a strange mix of fear and fascination as I watched him dig through the remnants of someone else's life. Suddenly, he pulled out an old, rusted knife. He held it up like a trophy, grinning widely. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just an innocent exploration. There was something darker at play here. I realized that I didn't know this man as well as I thought I did. My heart raced as I backed away, suddenly desperate to escape. I turned to leave, but Ryan stepped in front of me, blocking my path. The look in his eyes had shifted, a glimmer of something unsettling lurking beneath the surface. I felt trapped in a nightmare, and every instinct in me screamed to run. I managed to slip past him, sprinting out of the cabin and back into the woods. I don't even know how I found my way back to the car, but adrenaline fueled my flight. I could hear him calling for me, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I drove as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling the weight of the world lifting off my shoulders as I finally left that place behind. In the days that followed, I cut all contact with Ryan. I blocked him on Hinge, and I avoided places where I thought he might be. The unease lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something truly disturbing. I told myself it was just a bad experience, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I had brushed off the warning signs and let myself be swept away by the thrill of adventure. Now, I was left with a haunting memory that would stay with me for a long time. Dating apps can be a bit of a wild ride, right? I mean, you swipe left, you swipe right, and sometimes you end up with a match that makes you wonder if you just stumbled into a horror movie. That's exactly how it went down for me one chilly September evening when I decided to give Hinge another shot after a string of lackluster dates. I had just finished a shift at work and was ready to unwind. After a couple of minutes of scrolling through the profiles, I came across someone who caught my attention. His name was Derek. He had that rugged look with a mysterious smile, and his profile was peppered with intriguing questions and answers that made him seem both charming and a bit edgy. He was into hiking, photography, and even had a few well-placed quotes about the beauty of nature. I was sold. I swiped right, and just like that, we matched. The conversation started off light. We exchanged a few messages about our favorite hiking spots, and he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. It felt refreshing, especially after my past experiences with guys who seemed more interested in their own egos than in actually getting to know me. Derek told me he was planning a weekend trip to a national park and invited me to join him. Normally, I would have hesitated, but something about him felt different. There was a spark of excitement that made me say yes without a second thought. The following weekend arrived, and I found myself driving to a secluded cabin he had booked near the park. As I pulled up, I noticed the place seemed a bit off. It was a rustic cabin, nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by towering trees that loomed like silent watchers. I brushed off the eerie feeling creeping up my spine, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. Derek was waiting outside, grinning like he had just won the lottery. We spent the first day hiking, and it was exhilarating. The fresh air filled my lungs, and I felt alive. Derek was charming and attentive, always making sure to check in on me and share interesting facts about the flora and fauna surrounding us. But as the sun began to set, a feeling of unease settled in. The woods transformed from serene to unsettling, shadows stretching like long fingers across the ground. That night, we returned to the cabin, and Derek lit a fire in the fireplace. We talked and laughed, and I almost forgot about the creeping shadows outside. But as the night went on, I noticed something strange. Every time I glanced out the window, I could swear I saw a figure darting between the trees. Each time I looked, though, there was nothing. Just the flickering shadows of the fire dancing on the walls. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, fueled by the eerie atmosphere. The second day was when things took a weird turn. We decided to explore a more remote part of the park, a place Derek claimed was a hidden gem. The hike was longer and the path less defined, but Derek seemed confident, leading the way with an enthusiasm that made me both excited and a little apprehensive. As we ventured deeper into the woods, I felt an inexplicable sense of dread creeping in. The trees were denser, blocking out the sunlight, and the air felt cooler, almost stagnant. After a couple of hours, we reached a clearing. It was beautiful but unsettling, with an abandoned cabin that looked like it hadn't seen life in decades. I suggested we head back, but Derek insisted we explore it. He was so enthusiastic that I didn't want to rain on his parade, so I reluctantly followed him inside. The cabin was dark and musty, filled with remnants of a life long gone. Old furniture sat rotting in the corners, and the walls were covered in peeling paint. But what caught my eye was a collection of photographs strewn across a table. They were all black and white, depicting different people standing in front of the cabin, some looking happy, others visibly distressed. My heart raced as I flipped through them, feeling a strange connection to the faces staring back at me. Derek seemed unfazed and kept wandering around, exploring the rest of the cabin. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a shadow darker than the rest, moving outside. I felt my stomach drop as the realization hit me. I wasn't imagining things. I called out to Derek, who was still exploring the back room. I wanted to leave, but he urged me to stay, saying it was just the wind, that I shouldn't let my imagination get the best of me. Reluctantly, I stayed a little longer, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I felt a chill run down my spine, and every instinct told me to get out. Finally, I convinced Derek to leave, and we made our way back to the trail. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. The branches crackled behind us, and every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. Derek seemed oblivious, chatting away about the photos, but I was on high alert, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. When we reached the car, I breathed a sigh of relief. But as we drove back to the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone or something following us. Once back at the cabin, I suggested we just relax and watch a movie, but I could see the excitement in Derek's eyes. He wanted to go back out, to chase after whatever was in those woods. I tried to dissuade him, but he was insistent. It was like he was possessed by some adventurous spirit that I didn't recognize. As night fell, I felt trapped. The shadows grew longer, and the cabin creaked with age. Fear settled in my gut as I realized I didn't know this person as well as I thought. When Derek finally suggested we head out for a night hike, I panicked. I couldn't go out there again, not with that feeling gnawing at me. I told him I wanted to stay in, but he looked at me with a strange intensity that sent chills down my spine. In that moment, I knew I had to leave. I gathered my things and made an excuse about needing to get back home early. As I packed my bag, I could feel the tension in the air. Derek didn't push back. Instead, he just watched me with an unsettling calmness. I hurriedly threw my stuff into my car, my heart pounding as I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure lurking in the trees. I got in the car and drove off, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The entire way home, I kept looking in my rearview mirror, convinced I'd see him chasing after me. But there was nothing but darkness. I arrived home feeling a mix of relief and confusion, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. As the days passed, I tried to forget about Derek and that weekend, but I couldn't shake the unease. It wasn't until a week later that I received a message from him. It was a photo of that abandoned cabin, but the focus was different this time. It was the faces in the photographs, now with an added caption, "They never left." I felt a chill run down my spine as realization hit me. Derek wasn't just some charming guy from Hinge. He was part of something far more disturbing, and I had almost become a part of it too. I thought online dating was supposed to be fun, a little quirky, maybe even a little awkward. I never expected to find myself in a situation that felt straight out of a horror movie. It all started on Hinge, that app where your profile is a mix of cute prompts and a few curated pictures that supposedly capture your essence. I had swiped right on this guy named Mike. He had an intriguing profile, complete with some offbeat humor and a couple of adventurous hiking pics. He seemed normal enough, so I figured why not? We exchanged messages for a few days, and while the conversation flowed easily, I noticed some oddities. For one, Mike was overly enthusiastic about wanting to meet up. I appreciated the eagerness, but it felt a little too intense for someone I barely knew. I pushed aside that nagging feeling, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. We set a date for a Friday evening, and I chose a cozy little coffee shop in town, a place that felt safe and familiar. Friday rolled around, and I arrived a bit early, wanting to soak in the atmosphere and calm my nerves. The cafe was bustling with people, and the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods filled the air. I was sipping on my latte when Mike finally walked in. He was taller than I expected, with a broad smile that seemed friendly enough. We exchanged pleasantries and settled into a booth. At first, everything felt fine. We chatted about our interests, shared some laughs, and I felt myself relaxing. But as the conversation deepened, I began to notice some red flags. He kept steering the topics toward darker subjects, like true crime shows and unsolved mysteries. I tried to steer it back to lighter topics, but he always found a way to circle back to the macabre. I figured he was just a bit eccentric, and I chuckled it off even when he started sharing stories about his hobbies, which included collecting old knives and researching serial killers. It was unsettling, but I didn't want to seem judgmental. After a couple of hours, I suggested we wrap it up. I was already feeling uneasy, and I thought I could escape without making it too awkward. But Mike had other plans. He suggested we go for a walk nearby. I hesitated, but didn't want to be rude. Plus, it was still early, and I figured a stroll might shake off the tension. We stepped outside, and the cool evening air felt refreshing. As we walked, he pointed out various buildings and local history, but then he started talking about this abandoned warehouse just a few blocks away. He described it in detail, mentioning how he'd always wanted to explore it. The way he spoke, it was as if he had this intense fascination with the place, and I could feel my heart rate quickening. My instincts were screaming at me to turn back, but I forced a laugh and tried to play it off. Then, out of nowhere, he suggested we check it out. My gut dropped. I made up an excuse about having to wake up early the next day, hoping it would deter him. Instead, he just laughed it off, saying it would be an adventure. I tried to remain calm, but inside I was freaking out. I kept thinking about the horror stories I had read about women who went off with strangers and never returned. I told him I really needed to head home, and finally, after some awkward back and forth, he relented. We walked back toward the cafe where my car was parked. I could feel the tension radiating off him, and as we approached my vehicle, he asked if I wanted to hang out again. I hesitated, my mind racing. I said I'd think about it, and he grabbed my hand for a brief moment, holding it just a little too tight. I quickly pulled away and got into my car, heart pounding in my chest. Driving home, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I thought I had made a huge mistake. The more I reflected on his words and the intensity of his gaze, the more I felt like I had narrowly escaped something. That night, I tossed and turned, replaying every moment of our date in my head. I decided to ghost him, thinking it was the safest option. I blocked him on all social media platforms and deleted our messages. A week passed, and I thought I was in the clear, but then I received a notification on my phone. It was an email from a strange address. Curious and a bit anxious, I opened it. It was a picture of me taken that night, clearly from a distance. I could see myself getting into my car, oblivious to the camera. My stomach dropped. The email contained a single line: "You should have come to the warehouse." Panic set in. I quickly checked the other social media accounts I had, and I noticed I had a new follower. It was Mike. My heart raced as I realized he was still trying to reach me, even after all that time. I felt like I was in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I changed my passwords, tightened my privacy settings, and even contacted a few friends, asking them to stay close for a while. Days turned into weeks, and my anxiety didn't fade. I avoided going out by myself, especially at night. I kept checking my surroundings, feeling like I was being watched. I didn't tell anyone about the email because I didn't want to seem paranoid, and I hoped it was just a sick joke. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Then, one evening, as I was getting ready to head out for a quick grocery run, I heard a knock at my door. My heart nearly stopped. I peeked through the peephole, and my stomach sank. It was Mike, standing there with that same creepy smile. I backed away from the door, my mind racing as I thought about what to do. He knocked again, and I heard him call my name softly. I wanted to scream, but forced myself to stay quiet. I grabbed my phone, heart pounding as I dialed 911, waiting for the operator to answer with shaky hands. As I stood there, frozen, I heard him murmur something like, "I just want to talk." But I knew better than to engage. The police arrived quickly, and by the time they got there, Mike had vanished. They took my report seriously and promised to patrol my area, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. I didn't care, I just wanted to feel safe again. From that day forward, I learned that sometimes what seems like a harmless swipe can lead you down a path you never wanted to walk. Online dating took on a completely different meaning for me after that night. I was thankful to be safe, but I knew I had to be more cautious. In a world where connections can be made with a simple swipe, I realized the potential darkness that could lurk behind those profiles. That's the reality of it. The thrill of finding a match can quickly turn into a nightmare if you're not careful. So I had this experience on Hinge that totally flipped my dating life upside down. I mean, you go on those apps hoping to meet someone cool, maybe grab a drink and share a few laughs. Instead, I ended up with a story that still creeps me out when I think about it. It started off like any other day, scrolling through profiles while sipping on my lukewarm coffee. I came across this one guy who looked pretty normal. Great smile, decent job, and a few interesting hobbies listed. The usual banter in the prompts was there too, and I felt an instant connection, so I swiped right. We matched almost immediately, and I was surprised at how quickly he responded. His messages were clever and funny, and I felt like I was chatting with someone I actually wanted to get to know. We exchanged a few texts about our favorite movies and the best pizza places in town. The conversation flowed easily, and before I knew it, we were planning a date for that Friday at a local bar known for its craft cocktails. I was excited, maybe a little too excited. I hadn't felt a spark like this in a while. Friday came, and I dressed to impress, probably putting in more effort than I should have for a casual first date. I arrived at the bar a little early, sipping on a drink while keeping an eye out for him. When he walked in, he looked just like his photos, maybe even better in person. We hugged it out, and I could feel a bit of warmth in his touch, so I thought we were off to a good start. The conversation was lively, and we laughed about everything from our childhood memories to our ridiculous pet peeves. As the night progressed, I noticed something slightly off about him. He had this intensity in his gaze, almost like he was analyzing everything I said. At first, I brushed it off as just him being passionate, but it started to feel a little unsettling. There were moments when he'd get way too close, leaning in a bit too much for comfort, and I'd instinctively lean back, trying to regain that personal space. I took a sip of my drink, hoping it would calm my nerves. The night was going relatively well until he suddenly shifted the topic to more personal stuff. He asked about my family, my job, and my past relationships. I was open, sharing bits and pieces, but then it took a weird turn when he started talking about his ex-girlfriend. He described her in a way that felt obsessive, almost like he was still hung up on her. I tried to change the subject, but he kept bringing her up. It felt like I was listening to a true crime podcast where protagonist was still stuck in a past that wouldn't let him go. By the time we finished our drinks, I was feeling a bit uneasy. I thought it might just be nerves, so I suggested we grab some food. He agreed, and we walked to a nearby diner. The atmosphere was completely different, brighter and more casual, but the vibe didn't shift much. He was still talking about his ex, and I started to feel trapped in this conversation. I tried to steer it back to lighter topics, but he was relentless. It was like he was trying to show me his emotional depth, but it just came off as unhinged. After a few bites of my burger, I felt the need to excuse myself. I went to the restroom, splashed some water on my face, and tried to shake off the weirdness of the night. When I returned, he was waiting for me with a new intensity in his eyes. It almost felt like he had been waiting for me to leave so he could collect his thoughts or maybe even plan his next move. He leaned in closer again, and I could feel my heart racing. Something about him felt off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to get out of there. As we finished our meal, I politely suggested we wrap things up. He seemed disappointed, but I didn't want to linger any longer. He offered to walk me to my car, and I hesitated before agreeing. The streetlights flickered above us as we walked, and the air felt heavy with an unsettling silence. He was talking, but I didn't really register the words. My mind was racing with thoughts about how to escape this situation. When we reached my car, he leaned in for a hug again, but this time I pulled away quickly. He looked taken aback, and I could see a flicker of anger in his eyes. He asked if we could see each other again, but I just smiled awkwardly and said maybe. I hurried into my car and locked the doors, watching as he walked away, a sense of relief washing over me. I thought that was the end of it, but it was just the beginning. The next day, my phone buzzed with a message from him. It was long and filled with elaborate details about how much he enjoyed our date and how he felt connection. I didn't respond right away. I was still processing everything, trying to convince myself that I hadn't overreacted. But as the hours went by, I received more messages, each one more intense than the last. It started with sweet nothings, but quickly escalated to messages about how he felt like we were meant to be together. He started sending me memes and quotes about love, and it felt like he was trying to create this fantasy that I had never signed up for. I felt trapped in my own life, and I didn't know how to get out of it. When I finally mustered the courage to block him, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But then came the real kicker. A couple of days later, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw a post that made my heart drop. It was a picture of a girl who looked exactly like me, wearing the same outfit I had on during our date. The caption was chilling, something about finding the one and how he would never let her go. My stomach sank. I didn't know how he had gotten that picture, but it felt like a twisted game he was playing. I decided to take a break from dating altogether. I unfollowed all the dating apps and focused on myself for a while. The experience was disturbing, and it made me realize just how quickly things could turn dark. What started as a hopeful evening turned into a nightmare, reminding me that not everyone you meet online has the same intentions as you do. It was a reality check that I didn't see coming, and honestly, I'm still haunted by that night. So, I had this wild experience on Hinge that still makes my skin crawl. You know how everyone says online dating is like a box of chocolates? Well, this was more like a box of expired chocolates that someone had left in the sun. It all started last summer when I decided to give Hinge a shot after a pretty rough breakup. I was skeptical, but figured I might as well see what the fuss was about. I filled out my profile, tossed in a few goofy pics, and started swiping. I matched with a guy named Derek who seemed pretty normal at first. He had a nice smile and a solid job, seemed like the classic good guy type. We chatted for a few days, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After some back and forth, we decided to meet up for drinks. I chose a trendy bar downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and hipster vibes. I arrived a bit early, nerves buzzing, and ordered a drink while I waited. When Derek walked in, I felt a bit of relief. He looked just like his photos, but there was something off about him. Maybe it was the way he scanned a room like he was searching for something or someone, but I shrugged it off and chalked it up to first date jitters. We started talking, and at first, everything flowed smoothly. He was funny, and we shared a lot of common interests, but as the night wore on, I noticed he kept glancing at his phone. It wasn't just a casual check. He was practically glued to it. I tried to ignore it, but it was hard not to feel like I was competing with whatever was happening on that screen. Eventually, he put his phone down, and I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe we'd really connect. That hope was short-lived. Out of nowhere, he started pulling out these random stories about his ex-girlfriend, how she cheated on him, how she had a crazy family, and all this heavy baggage that felt way too soon to be discussing. It was like he was trying to bond over trauma, but it just made things awkward. Still, I was determined to make the best of it. I laughed at his jokes, tried to steer the conversation toward lighter topics, and even suggested we play a game of Would You Rather to break the tension. That worked for a while until he suddenly leaned in and whispered something unsettling. He said he had a crazy ex who stalked him after their breakup and that he still received weird messages from her. It was a strange thing to say, and my instincts kicked in. I started feeling a little uneasy, but didn't want to be rude. The rest of the night was a blur, a series of uncomfortable moments that ended with me checking the time way too often. After what felt like an eternity, I finally excused myself, saying I had an early morning. He offered to walk me to my car, which I reluctantly accepted. As we walked, he kept talking about how he was ready to find someone new, how he was over his ex, and how he just needed the right person in his life. I smiled and nodded, doing my best to be polite, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When we reached my car, he leaned in for a hug, which I awkwardly returned, and then he surprised me by asking if we could meet again. I hesitated before giving a non-committal answer. I had a gut feeling that I should just ghost him, but I didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. After that night, I didn't think much about Derek until I started receiving strange messages a few days later. At first, it was just a couple of texts asking how I was doing and if I thought about our next date. I replied politely, but I could feel the boundaries beginning to blur. Then things escalated. He started sending me pictures of random places around the city, saying he thought of me whenever he passed by. I was uneasy but didn't want to seem dramatic. I decided to take a step back, limiting our conversations and keeping my replies short. This seemed to trigger something in him. He began messaging me late at night, always asking if I was up, and it felt invasive. I started to worry that I'd made a mistake by not just cutting him off completely. One night, I received a text that made my stomach drop. It was a blurry photo of my car parked at the grocery store, taken from a distance, with a message saying, "I saw you here. You look cute." I couldn't believe it. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, feeling a mix of anger and panic. I immediately blocked him on Hinge and then on my phone, hoping that would be the end of it. A week passed, and I felt a little more at ease. But then I received a friend request on Facebook from someone I didn't recognize. I clicked on the profile, and my blood ran cold. It was Derek, but the account looked different. No mutual friends, no post, just a blank slate. I ignored the request, but couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me. The next day, I went to a coffee shop I frequented, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. As I waited for my drink, I felt a presence behind me. Turning around, I came face to face with Derek. He had a big smile plastered on his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was like he had been waiting for me. I felt trapped, unable to move as he approached. He started talking about how he'd been thinking about me, how he was sorry for coming on too strong, and that he just wanted to clear the air. I was frozen, a mix of shock and fear coursing through me. I managed to excuse myself and bolted out of the coffee shop, my heart racing. I didn't look back, and I didn't stop until I was safely home, locking every door behind me. That was the last time I ever thought about Hinge or dating apps. The experience left me shaken, and it reinforced a lesson I didn't want to learn. Sometimes the sweetest chocolates can turn out to be the most bitter. I deleted my account and promised myself to stick to meeting people the old-fashioned way. I don't know what Derek's intentions were, but that experience taught me to trust my instincts. I still think about that night, the unsettling conversations, and how quickly things can spiral out of control. So, I never thought I'd be the kind of person to meet someone on a dating app, let alone have a genuinely disturbing experience. I downloaded Hinge more out of boredom than anything else. My friends were always raving about it, saying it was a more serious platform compared to the other apps. I figured, why not? I was fresh out of a long relationship and looking to meet new people, maybe even get a fun date or two. But I had no idea that my foray into the world of online dating would lead me down such a dark rabbit hole. I matched with this guy named Kyle. He had that rugged outdoorsy vibe that seemed to be all the rage. His profile was filled with pictures of him hiking, camping, and generally looking like someone who would be fun to hang out with. He talked about his love for nature, how he was into photography, and how he spent his weekends exploring the great outdoors. It all seemed harmless enough, and after a few days of chatting, I felt a bit of a spark. He was charming, witty, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a week of messaging back and forth, we decided to meet up. I chose a cozy little coffee shop in my neighborhood, thinking it would be a nice, low-pressure environment. I arrived early, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. When he walked in, I recognized him immediately. He looked just like his pictures, but there was something off about him. Maybe it was the way he scanned a room, his eyes darting around as if he was looking for something, or someone. I brushed it off as nerves. Our conversation started off fine. We talked about our favorite hiking trails, shared some laughs, and even bonded over our mutual love for dogs. But as the minutes passed, I started to notice little things. He had this intense way of looking at me, like he was dissecting every word I said. It was unsettling, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was just really focused. Then he started talking about his childhood. He mentioned that he grew up in a small town, and as he described it, the way his face changed was almost jarring. There was a darkness behind his eyes that I couldn't quite place. As he went deeper into his stories, I could feel the atmosphere shifting. He spoke of his hometown in a way that was almost nostalgic, but it quickly turned disturbing. He mentioned that there were rumors about a serial killer in the area when he was growing up. He said it with a casualness that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to laugh it off, but he was dead serious. He said that the killer was never caught and that even years later, people still whispered about it. He leaned in closer, and I could smell the coffee on his breath mixed with something metallic like blood. I started to feel trapped. The coffee shop, which had been a safe haven just moments before, now felt like a cage. Kyle continued to weave these bizarre tales, each more unsettling than the last. He talked about how he liked to explore abandoned places, how he found it thrilling to be where no one else dared to go. His eyes lit up when he described sneaking into old houses and factories. I could see the excitement in his expression, but it was laced with something sinister. At one point, he pulled out his phone and showed me photos from his latest adventure. At first, they looked like standard shots of old buildings, but then I saw something that made my stomach drop. There were pictures of what looked like old crime scenes, dilapidated homes where you could almost feel the ghosts of the past lingering. The caption on one of them read, "You can still smell the fear." I didn't know how to react, but my heart was racing and I could feel my palms start to sweat. I was trying to think of a way to excuse myself without being rude when he suddenly changed the topic again. He started asking me personal questions, ones that felt way too intimate for a first date. He wanted to know where I lived, how often I was home alone, and if I ever felt unsafe in my neighborhood. I didn't know how to respond. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I could sense the weight of his gaze on me, almost like he was cataloging my every response. I decided it was time to leave. I made up an excuse about needing to get home to walk my dog, which was partially true, but honestly, I just wanted to get away from him. As I stood up, he reached out and grabbed my wrist gently but firmly. He looked at me with an intensity that felt like a mix of desperation and something darker. I managed to pull away, feeling a rush of adrenaline as I practically bolted out of the coffee shop. Once I was outside, I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the uneasiness. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe he was just awkward and didn't know how to connect. But deep down, I knew that something about him felt genuinely wrong. As I walked home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My mind raced as I replayed everything in my head, the intensity of his gaze, the disturbing stories, and how freely he talked about fear and danger. Later that night, I found myself scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself. I opened up Hinge to unmatch with him, but to my surprise, I found a message from him. My stomach dropped as I clicked on it. It was a picture of an old abandoned house with a caption, "I think I found my next adventure. Wanna join?" I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, a wave of nausea rolling over me. I blocked him immediately and deleted the app. I never thought I'd have such a terrifying experience from a dating app. It was a harsh reminder that sometimes people aren't what they seem. I learned that some adventures are better left untouched, and that not everyone who appears charming has good intentions. I went to bed that night still feeling the weight of his gaze on me, a reminder that sometimes the darkness we fear is lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I had been swiping on Hinge for a few weeks, mostly just for fun. The app felt like a never-ending scroll through a gallery of potential dates, each profile more curated than the last. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just some casual connections, a few drinks, maybe a laugh or two. I had my fair share of awkward first dates and ghosting stories, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. It started with a guy named Jake. He had a friendly smile and a few pictures that made him look adventurous. Hiking, rock climbing, and even a couple of shots with his dog in a park. He seemed genuine, so I swiped right. We matched almost immediately, and the conversation flowed surprisingly well. Jake was funny, charming, and we bonded over our mutual love for pizza and horror movies. After a few days of banter, he suggested we meet up at a local bar, and I was excited. I could feel that little thrill of anticipation that comes with a first date. The night arrived, and I put in a little extra effort to look nice. I arrived at the bar early, nervous but hopeful. When he walked in, I recognized him immediately. He was even more attractive in person. We chatted over drinks, and I was struck by how easy it was to talk to him. We shared stories, laughed, and I felt my initial nervousness melting away. There was a spark, or at least I thought so. As the night wore on, Jake suggested we go for a walk to a nearby park. It seemed like a natural progression, and with the city lights twinkling around us, I felt adventurous. The park was mostly empty, which added to the allure of the night. We walked, talked, and then, without warning, he took my hand. I felt a thrill, but also a slight unease creeping in. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the excitement of a new connection. As we strolled deeper into the park, I noticed a change in his demeanor. He started talking about his childhood in a way that felt a little too intense for a first date. He shared stories of his family, his struggles, and some odd incidents that made me slightly uncomfortable. It was like he was trying to bond, but the way he described certain memories had an unsettling edge. I tried to keep the mood light, but he kept circling back to darker themes, almost as if he was testing my reactions. I suggested we turn back, feeling an instinctual need to distance myself from the intensity of his stories. He seemed to sense my hesitation and laughed it off, but there was a glint in his eyes that made me uneasy. I picked up my pace, hoping to get back to the bar where it felt safer. But he grabbed my hand tighter, and there was something in his grip that sent a shiver down my spine. When we finally returned to the bar, I felt a rush of relief. The energy shifted again, and Jake's demeanor changed. He became overly affectionate, leaning in closer than before. I was taken aback, but thought maybe it was just his way of showing interest. As the night progressed, I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but he kept veering into darker territory, mentioning things like his fascination with true crime and his interest in understanding what makes people tick. At one point, he casually mentioned how he loved watching documentaries about serial killers. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking, but the look in his eyes told me he was serious. I started to feel trapped. The fun banter from earlier had vanished, replaced by a growing sense of dread. I made an excuse about needing to go to the restroom, hoping to gather my thoughts and figure out how to end the night gracefully. After a few minutes in the restroom, I splashed some water on my face, trying to shake off the unease. When I returned, Jake was waiting for me, and he seemed even more intense. As we walked outside, he suggested we go back to his place to watch a movie. The words hung in the air, and I felt a wave of panic. I knew I had to say no, but the way he looked at me made me feel like I couldn't refuse. With every ounce of confidence I could muster, I declined his offer and said I needed to head home. His face shifted, and for a split second, I saw something dark flash across his features. Disappointment or anger, I wasn't sure. He masked it quickly with a smile and walked me to my car. The air felt charged as we reached my vehicle. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, and I fumbled with my keys, desperate to get inside and lock the door. As I finally got in and slammed the door, I felt a rush of relief wash over me. But just as I was about to start the engine, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw Jake standing there watching. My heart raced as I backed out of the parking space, not daring to look back. I drove home with my hands trembling on the wheel, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Later that night, I replayed the entire evening in my head, feeling unsettled. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously off about Jake. I thought about his stories, his intensity, the way he seemed to shift from charming to predatory. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. After all, it was just one day, right? But the more I thought about it, the more I felt like I had narrowly escaped something sinister. I deleted the app the next day, feeling like I needed to cleanse my digital space. I didn't want to risk running into anyone like Jake again. The experience lingered in my mind, a reminder of how quickly things can shift from fun and flirty to frighteningly uncomfortable. I learned that sometimes what seems like a fun night out can turn into a horror story faster than you can swipe left. I've always been a bit skeptical about online dating. I mean, scrolling through a sea of faces and trying to decipher someone's personality from a couple of photos and a bio felt like a gamble. But after a series of uninspiring first dates, I figured, why not? I downloaded Hinge, hoping to find someone who could actually hold a conversation and maybe share a laugh or two. Little did I know, I was about to plunge into a weird rabbit hole that would leave me questioning my choices. The app started out like any other. I swiped right on a couple of profiles, and before I knew it, I matched with a guy named Jake. He had a charming smile, a few witty one-liners, and seemed to have a passion for hiking, which I found appealing. We exchanged messages, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations. Jake was funny and easy to talk to, and after a week of chatting, we decided to meet up for drinks at a cozy little bar downtown. The night of our date, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. I walked into the bar, scanning the room for Jake. When he finally arrived, I was struck by how different he looked from his photos. It wasn't just that he was a few inches shorter than I'd expected. There was something off about him. His eyes darted around the room too quickly, and he had this nervous energy that made me question if he was really as charming as he seemed. We sat down, and as the drinks flowed, I tried to shake off the weird vibe I was getting. He was talkative, maybe a little too much, going on about his job and how he loved to collect vintage cameras. But there was something unsettling in the way he spoke. He didn't just share details, he dissected them. He was overly enthusiastic about mundane topics, like the different types of lenses and shutter speeds. At first, I thought it was just a harmless quirk, but as the night wore on, I couldn't help but feel trapped in a conversation that had no escape route. Things started to get even weirder when he began to share stories from his childhood. At first, they were innocuous enough, but then he started talking about his obsession with horror movies and how they shaped his worldview. He described a particularly graphic scene from a film I'd never heard of and how it fascinated him. The way he spoke about fear felt almost reverent, like he was in awe of the chaos and violence on screen. I laughed it off, figuring he was just trying to impress me, but I could sense an underlying intensity in his words that made me uncomfortable. As the night dragged on, I found myself glancing at the clock, hoping for a graceful exit. But before I could formulate an excuse, he leaned in, eyes wide with excitement, and told me about his project. My heart sank. He described this collection he was curating, photos of strangers he'd taken without their knowledge, capturing raw emotions in public places. He claimed it was art, a way to explore the human experience, but the more he talked, the more I felt like I was watching a train wreck unfold in slow motion. I didn't know how to respond. Should I be horrified or intrigued? At that moment, a red flag went up. I had heard of street photography before, but this felt different. There was a possessiveness in the way he described his subjects, an unsettling ownership over their vulnerability. I tried to steer the conversation back to safer waters, but he kept circling back to his project, as if it was the only thing that mattered. I managed to distract him by asking about his favorite hiking spots, hoping to shift the tone of the evening. But then he casually mentioned that he had a special spot he liked to go to, somewhere secluded where he could really connect with nature. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to imagine what kind of connection he was talking about, but I could feel the atmosphere in the bar shift. The laughter around us faded, and I could practically hear my pulse in my ears. I decided it was time to leave. I excused myself, saying I had an early morning, and he seemed to take it well, though I could still see a hint of disappointment in his eyes. We said our goodbyes, and as I walked to my car, I felt a strange mix of relief and lingering dread. The evening had been bizarre, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly dodged a bullet. But the story didn't end there. A couple of days later, I received a message from Jake. It was a photo, a picture he'd taken of me during our date, clearly snapped without my knowledge. I felt a chill run down my spine. I hadn't even noticed him taking it, but there I was, mid-laugh, completely unaware that I was being observed like some kind of specimen. I stared at the screen, frozen in disbelief. This wasn't art. It was invasive. I didn't respond, hoping that would be the end of it. But the next day, I received another message, and then another. Each one was a different photo, all taken during our date. It felt like he was trying to build some sort of narrative, documenting our time together through his lens. The last one was particularly unsettling. It was a close-up shot of my hands on the table, my fingers wrapped around my glass. It felt like he was trying to capture me, piece by piece, and it turned my stomach. I finally blocked him, but the unease lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone I barely knew had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. It was a reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control in the world of online dating, how the charming smile in a profile pic can hide something much darker. I didn't know what Jake was truly capable of, but I knew I was done swiping. The idea of meeting someone new felt like opening Pandora's box, and I wasn't ready for whatever might come spilling out. I was scrolling through Hinge one night, half-heartedly swiping left and right while half watching some terrible reality show. I had just gotten out of a long relationship, and my friends insisted I try online dating to get back out there. I was skeptical, but willing to give it a shot. Most of my matches were pretty standard, the usual small talk about coffee or Netflix shows. But then I came across his profile. His photos were a mix of casual and adventurous, a guy who looked like he enjoyed life. He had a warm smile and seemed approachable, so I swiped right. We matched almost instantly, and the conversation kicked off with the usual banter. He seemed charming, intelligent, and had a wicked sense of humor. It wasn't long before we were chatting late into the night, sharing our love for travel, music, and the strangest food combinations we had ever tried. He lived only a few miles away, which made me feel even more comfortable. After a few days of messaging, he suggested we meet up for drinks at a bar in my neighborhood. I was excited, feeling like I was finally taking a step toward moving on. The night of our date arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. He looked exactly like his photos when he walked in. He was dressed casually in a fitted shirt and jeans, with confidence that made him even more attractive. The conversation flowed easily, and he had a way of making me laugh that felt effortless. It was refreshing, and I found myself opening up more than I planned. We talked about everything from our families to our most embarrassing moments. I was surprised by how quickly I felt at ease with him. As the night progressed, I noticed something off about him. There were small quirks, like how he would lean in just a bit too close when he spoke, invading my personal space. He made intense eye contact that felt more intense than necessary. I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just a passionate person. The vibe was still good, and I didn't want to overthink things. After a few drinks, he suggested we go back to his place to continue the night. I hesitated but ultimately agreed, thinking it would be a fun adventure. His apartment was in a trendy part of town, and it looked exactly like something out of a magazine. It was well decorated, dimly lit, and had an inviting ambience. We settled on the couch with another round of drinks, and the conversation continued to flow. But then something shifted. He started asking more personal questions, digging deeper into my past relationships and my fears. It felt intrusive, but I tried to play it cool and answered as best I could. I thought maybe he was just trying to get to know me better. Then he suggested we play a game, something he called Truth or Truth. It was a twist on the classic party game, where instead of choosing between truth or dare, you just had to answer two questions honestly. At first, I thought it would be lighthearted, but his questions took a darker turn pretty quickly. He asked about my biggest regrets, my deepest fears, and even what I would do if I could get away with anything without consequences. I felt exposed and began to realize that there was a side to him that was unnerving. I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but he kept pushing. It felt like he was trying to get a rise out of me. When I told him my biggest fear was losing loved ones, he went on a rant about how death was inevitable and how it actually fascinated him. He spoke about it so matter-of-factly, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I was ready to call it a night, but I didn't want to seem rude. So I laughed it off, though it felt forced. Things continued to spiral when he suggested we watch a movie. I thought it would be a good distraction, but as soon as the film started, he leaned in closer, his body rigid against mine. I felt trapped, like the friendly vibe we had at the bar was long gone. I tried to inch away, but he seemed oblivious to my discomfort. The movie faded into the background, and I could feel the tension in the air. Suddenly, he reached for my hand, and I flinched. It was instinctual. I didn't want him to touch me. He pulled back, and for a moment I thought I had misread the situation. Maybe I was overreacting. But then he looked at me, and there was something in his eyes that sent alarm bells ringing in my head. He had this intensity that felt predatory. I felt the urge to leave, but I didn't want to be dramatic, so I stayed. The rest of the night was a blur of awkward silence and forced smiles. I wanted to scream, to run out of his apartment, but I kept telling myself that I was just being paranoid. We ended up watching the movie until the credits rolled, and I tried to act like I was still having a good time. But inside, I was in full-on panic mode. When he asked if I wanted to stay the night, I finally found my voice. I made an excuse about having an early morning and decided it was best to go home. As I walked to my car, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I remember thinking about how wrong it had felt, how I ignored my gut instincts. I drove home in a daze, replaying the night in my mind. I deleted his number before I even got home, and I promised myself that I would trust my instincts in the future. It's strange how quickly a good time can turn into something unsettling. That day taught me more about intuition than any self-help book ever could. The experience lingered in my mind, a reminder of how easily things can go from fun to frightening, and how important it is to listen to that little voice inside your head.